Hello everyone, I'm here with Professor Timothy Goudge from the Jackson School of Geosciences. Now, you've done a lot of research specifically on Mars. Can you give us more information about that?
Yeah, so my research group studies the way in which planetary landscapes evolve. So we think about active processes that reshape the landscape, so things like rivers moving around or things like wind blowing sediment. And we think about how that reshapes the landscape. We do this on both Earth and other planets, and we've done a lot of work on Mars and thinking about when these processes were active, and in particular water was active a couple billion years ago. And so we think that, by looking at the surface of Mars, we can try and understand what that past environment was like.
So in the documentary, we get to see the two rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, go to Mars. Do you remember when this happened and how did it affect your research?
Yeah, so I remember very vividly, and I think it's not hyperbole to say that it actually really shaped my career trajectory. So the MER mission, or the Spirit and Opportunity rovers, launched in 2004, which was when I was finishing up high school. And I have a very vivid memory of being in high school, coming downstairs for breakfast and opening the front page of the Toronto Star, the newspaper from where I grew up. And there was this huge full page spread about what the missions were going to do and about all of the missions. And I remember being so enthralled and just sort of being captivated about studying the geology of other planets through these rovers. And then after that, I went off to college, started in 2005, so the next year, the year they actually landed, and ended up majoring in geology, and from there progressing through to a PhD to study the surface geology of Mars. So it was a very vivid memory for me of getting excited about planetary science and really planetary geology and studying the geology of other worlds.
Wow. So in the movie, they found water on Mars, which proved that there could possibly have been life on Mars. Can you tell us more about that and what you found in your research?
Yeah, so this is sort of a big question that all of the Mars science community is thinking about. And the MER rovers were a big part in sort of pushing us in this direction. So the sort of broad way we might think about this is that we know that Mars today is really cold. And so since it's really cold, all of the water on its surface is locked up as ice. So Mars actually has quite a lot of water, but it's all water ice, these big polar ice caps. But we think that something like 3.5 billion years ago, that water was present on the surface of Mars as liquid. And it was flowing across as rivers, it was filling up lakes, it was moving sediment around, which is some of the deposits, some of the rocks that the MER rovers have studied. And so this was really some early on-the-ground evidence that liquid water was present early in Mars's history, and really enticing for what that might mean for the search for life elsewhere in the solar system.
So if the water was possibly once a liquid, what caused it to now be a solid ice?
I mean, that's the question, right? So that's the key question that, most people in our science community are trying to understand. And as we, study these problems, both from on the ground using rovers, as well as from orbit using satellites that are actually orbiting Mars and collect data of the surface, images and things like that, which is most of what my group does, we're getting a better and better picture of what the evolution might have been like. So we used to think that Mars only had liquid water really early, sort of 3.5 billion years ago. We now have a sense that maybe getting later and later, so more and more recent, still a couple billion years ago, there might have been liquid water present. But what exactly caused that liquid water to lock up as water ice? We're still trying to figure out, but we think it must have been some big change in the planet's climate that led it to really cool down and not be able to support liquid water on the surface.
In the movie, they said that the water they found was really acidic, but yet that water signified that there was life on Mars, or potentially life on Mars. So would that have been microbial life, alien life, animals, humans? What type of species could that have been?
Right. So when we think about searching for life on Mars, we really are thinking about microbial life. So the simplest life forms we can imagine, which is sort of analogous to the first simplest life forms we had on Earth. And so when we think about life evolving on Earth, which we think might have happened as early as 3.9 or maybe even 4 billion years ago. So right around the time when Mars did have liquid water, but it was really, really simple for quite a long period of time. We only get complex life like you and I, or anything we see on the modern Earth very recently in terms of geologic history. So when we think about what life on early Mars might have been like, it must have been, if it existed at all, it would have been very simple microbial life.
So out of all the other planets in the solar system, why did scientists go to Mars to look for life?
That's a really, really good question, and there's lots of reasons why we think Mars might be a really enticing place for exploring for life elsewhere in the solar system. For one, it's our planetary neighbor, right? And so if you look at our sort of two planetary next door neighbors, there's Mars, and then there's Venus, which is way too hot at present. Venus has too thick of an atmosphere, and so its surface temperatures are not suitable to liquid water. Mars, however, it seems like might have been a surface that was more like Earth, at least at some point in its past. And so we've learned that from the first orbiters that have flown by and orbited the planet. So we've known for sort of 50 years that ancient Mars had a lot of liquid water reshaping its surface. And so that has really enticed us to Mars being a really great place to think about past life in our solar system. And since the MER missions, there's also been a lot of research going on into other places in our solar system that might have harbored life in the past. In particular, studying large moons of Jupiter and Saturn. We think they have liquid water at present. These large oceans beneath a really, really thick ice layer. And so those are other really, really enticing environments to go explore for life elsewhere in our solar system, because we really do think that a major requirement for life as we know it on Earth is the presence of water.
So have you seen this fascinating film, Goodnight, Oppy?
You know what? I haven't had the chance to see it. It is on my list of things to do over the winter holiday, though. I'm really, really looking forward to it. I've heard great things. It's so interesting to have seen this mission and the results from the mission from sort of an academic or science perspective, but now to see a documentary that explores that, but also sort of explores, I think, the human element of it as well. So I'm really, really keen to see that and to see, sort of the emotional connection we make with these missions.
As we talked about earlier, you said you knew some of the scientists that are in the film. Can you tell us more about that?
One of the scientists who I know is featured in the film, Dr. Abigail Freeman, was a PhD student. She was doing her PhD student at Washington University in St. Louis. At the same time, I was doing my PhD at Brown University. And so we were sort of contemporary graduate students. We met through some science team workshops that we were both involved in. And so when we would go to conferences, we would sort of see each other and go to meals together and things like that. And so it's really cool as you progress through graduate school. You sort of go to these science conferences and you see all these famous scientists. And then as your career progresses, you see your friends from these conferences turn into really famous scientists like Dr. Freeman, who's now featured in this documentary. And so I'm really excited to see her featured in this film.
So hey, a famous scientist in a movie star.
I know, it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's super neat. Yeah.
Do you think it's important for, the average citizen who may not be interested in astronomy or geology to learn about the twin rovers?
I do. The question of, are we alone in the universe, or even closer to home, are we alone in our solar system? Is there life, or has there been life elsewhere? I think it's hard to argue with the fact that that's kind of just an inspiring question that lots of people would be interested in knowing the answer to. It's such a big question, right? And the way in which we explore these really big science questions takes a huge amount of work and a huge amount of people. And I think that's something that, is really important to understand for how science is done. It's not an individual sitting in their office making measurements and sort of coming up with some brilliant theory. It's large teams of people working together to do something that seems impossible, but is actually something that we can do when we all work together and we put our minds to some engineering feat to answer these really big science questions. And so I think, I haven't seen the documentary, but from what I've heard and from watching the trailers is, it puts a lot of the focus on the human element of the story. Humans are what make science possible. Like, we're the ones doing the science, and so it is fundamentally like a human endeavor. And I think exploring these really big questions is both really exciting, and I'm biased because I'm a scientist, but personally I think our ability to explore these big questions is one of the like unique things about being human, is that we can devote our time and resources and brain power to thinking about these really, really big and profound questions, you know, that have major implications for how we think about our place in the universe. So in that sense of like trying to inspire excitement and trying to inspire people to think about the importance and the power of doing science and doing science as a team, I do think it's really important for, you know, the average person to watch this movie, and I think they would get a lot out of it.
So as a scientist, you're not studying, you know, the city or the country. You're studying the whole universe. So how did that make you feel about your place in the world and in existence?
You know, yeah, that's a great question, and that sort of like gets at, you know, what the power of thinking about, you know, life elsewhere, potentially in the solar system. And lots of people have said this before, but I think it's really true, is that personally I find that really inspiring and makes me so much more grateful for my existence. Like, there's so much more to think about within our universe, yet I exist. I can be here having this conversation with you. I can, you know, do all of the things I like in my family life, in my professional life. And the fact that I get to be here and do all of those things and have great experiences, you know, is just kind of remarkable when you think about it. It's just really, really great, and it makes me feel very grateful, and, you know, like that my existence and my ability to exist is just all the more special because of that.
That's a really interesting perspective. I wouldn't think that you would say, you know, that you feel grateful to be here. Because I know, well, let me rephrase that.
I know. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people, they would be like, you know, I'm just one blip on this planet, and I'm in one planet in the whole galaxy. So, like, it doesn't matter, like, you know.
I think that's one way to look at it, but, you know, I'm a glass half full person, and so I think, like, the flip side is like, wow, it's so amazing that I get to be here, and that I get to, be having this conversation. I get to study what I get to study. I get to, you know, exist in this beautiful, amazing, complicated world. You know, you can view that negatively of like, oh, I'm just a grain of sand in a sand sea, but I think it's like, well, yeah, that's super special that you get to be that grain of sand and get to exist. So maybe it's my nature of trying to be positive, but I do think it inspires some sort of feeling of gratitude.
I like that idea, and I think it's definitely an attitude that more people should adopt.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much for being here for our interview, and I got some homework for you. You have to watch the
I know,
Goodnight
yes.
Oppy movie. It is so good.
Easiest homework assignment ever. And thank you so much for the conversation. It was really nice chatting.